All right, all right. We are back for Tiny Teach Ins. This is the first Tiny Teach In May. It is the day after International Labor Day, which I feel like is ought to be all of May in some respects. And so I am thrilled to have a dear friend and a colleague, comrade, all that good stuff, whatever other C words we might lift up, because Baptist preachers tend to think in threes, bless the Lord. Um, Plenty good room, tiny teach ins. What is that all about? Let me do a bit of explanation. So, Tiny Teach Ins is kind of a mashup on NPR Tiny Desk. My favorite NPR Tiny Desk, in case anybody is wondering, you may not be, but hopefully the posing of the question sparked some curiosity. Brother Gregory Porter's Tiny Desk is one of my favorites. So that's a part of it, and it represents having a more intimate, interactive space on the one hand. And then, of course, the teachings refers to the time-honored movement tradition of having focused conversation that's meant to be participatory and that's meant to evoke political education, meaning we each have some expertise, we each have something to contribute to the conversation. These ongoing discussions are in part inspired by my third book, Plain and Good Room, which seeks to make um, a case for anti-imperial democratic socialisms. The anti-imperial matters because there are some versions of socialism that seek to do all the things domestically while funding and fueling empire abroad. So we've got to be clear about the varieties within the tradition, some of which are not necessarily the most life-giving and liberating across the board. Um, as we lean into the tiny teaching conversation, we'd be remiss not to name that young folks are continuing to stage encampments despite military opposition, despite coercive force being deployed against them. And they are themselves engaging in the rich traditions of teach ins, whether that's a CCNY, where connections are being made between a free Palestine and a free CUNY, whether that's in Emory, in my hometown of Atlanta, where connections are being made between imperial occupation and genocide in Gaza and the creation of Cop City. And maybe let me add a third connection, that a part of how racial capitalism legitimates itself, in at least some cases, is having a patina of progress and representation. So its proponents would argue, and having Black mayors at the helm, who nevertheless are still administering regimes of violence, repression, and just because some vernacular may go along with that, doesn't make it any more freeing and liberating. Dear friends, I'm thrilled to be joined by Minister Candace Simpson, the founder of Fish Sandwich Heaven. I've been waiting to ask Minister Candace, is the fish catfish? Is it whiting? What kind of, is it snapper? What kind of fish is going in the sandwich? A PhD student and soon to be candidate at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and so many other things. A writer, essayist, um, someone whose passion for pedagogy and deep understanding is exemplary. And so thrilled to have you here.
Thanks so much. It's funny because fish is actually my least favorite meat to work with when I'm
Is that
cooking.
so?
Yeah, I just don't like cooking fish, but I do wonder like how funky it got when Jesus was doing when he was feeding 5,000 people because is just it's a funky protein. So,
It is.
we could do something with that too, but
It is. It is. Well, I appreciate you lifting that up, and want to give an invitation to folks as they are joining to please drop your comments, drop your questions, points of clarification or of order. If you just PowerPoints, bullet points, whatever they may be, we want to have them. The more you get engaged, the more we have. Um, uh, Colors to work with. This is a community canvas, and the more you weigh in, the more we can work it on out together. In terms of a flow for tonight, I'll say just a few brief words about what racial capitalism is, at least one way of entering that conversation. And then Minister Candace and I are going to hop right into conversation. And we hope that you will join us in this discussion. This is a teach in, meaning that there'll be intermittent pauses throughout so that we can share resources, do a little bit of underlining, italics, and so forth. What is racial capitalism? Political theorist Cedric Robinson and American Studies scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore have, among others, popularized this term of art, racial capitalism. And racial capitalism, I don't want to draw on Sharice Burton Staley here, essentially asserts that the wealth of our global economy is based on moments of primitive accumulation that effectively amount to stolen land, stolen labor, and extraction and strip mining of creation's resources. We could multiply the list of indictments on and on and on. But the take home point is that capitalism is not some sphere of history neutral, race neutral, power neutral space where buyers and sellers come and bargain on a terrain of equal footing as your kind of standard macroeconomic textbook would have it, but rather there's dispossession, there's extraction, there is patriarchy, there is heteropatriarchy, if we take our cue as we should from Bell Hooks, built into it from the very beginning. And Plenty Good Room, which is the title of my forthcoming book, really draws on the rich resources and symbolic inheritance of Black churches. Folks may have heard the phrase before, there's plenty good room for all at the foot of the cross, or there's plenty good room in God's kingdom, God's reign. And I'd argue that that's about more than just welcome and hospitality, important as that is, but that there's an anti-scarcity, anti-austerity conviction at the heart of that saying. And when we approach it in that way, we can find some materials for confronting the casket conferring conditions of racial capitalism and its close cousins of empire and patriarchy. So I want to hop right on into the conversation. Again, y'all let us know where you're from, where you're at, what your questions are. Um, and Plenty Good Room might argue that capitalism's imposition of austerity politics and zero sum economic thinking harms and injures Black communities. In contrast to that paradigm, I'm wondering how might we envision a more cooperative and collaborative way of organizing and using our resources at the local level?
You know, I'm thinking about the legacy of people like Callie House, who were like doing incredible organizing among Black people pre like email list, pre, uh,
Free.
like in some ways, I mean, maybe this is a tangent, but in some ways, it's a lot harder to organize people because um, there's so many avenues for our attention. Um,
Mm,
and I don't think that's because people don't care. I think we're just in an oversaturated world, so much information, so many things to do, so many bills to pay.
my
Um,
mind.
so people are overwhelmed, and so I honor that. But Callie House was organizing like hundreds of thousands of formerly enslaved Negroes across the country via the mail. And she would do speaking engagements and, she would organize. But I'm just so moved because they did not win. They were trying to petition the US government for reparations, and they were using the model of pensions that veterans would get. So the
Yep.
thought process was, well, they've served this country, they get a pension. Can we get a pension? And ultimately, they did not win those pensions. Um, but something else emerged in the organizing of it. And so they created these mutual aid societies that allowed them to meet each other's needs, particularly needs that the state would not handle. Um, And sometimes I'm really inspired by that story, and sometimes I'm really angry by that story. I'm angry,
Mm,
aged by it, um, because even in the failure, they have to win. There is no you can't just um there's you have to get something out of this. Like that, I'm thinking about that clip of Denzel Washington saying, "I'm leaving here with
out of
something."
here with something. Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like it's funny because that's like a Black response to living in this hell of a world. So, even though they didn't win the pensions from the US government, they still were able to care for each other. And I think that's something that I've been um, just ruminating on the last few years of my life. Because when we talk about mutual aid, it is deeper than giving one person, $20 here and there. Although if somebody want to
Yeah,
send me $20, I know how to move $20, okay? Because Black queer women, Black queer folk, Black trans folk, we are close to need. And so if you send me $20 and you say move this, yeah, I could move it. But that is just care. That is not necessarily mutual aid. Mutual aid is how we build solidarity and build community with each other. Um, and so that looks like schools, that looks like building, how are we going to live together? Like what is the house that we're going to live in?
yeah,
Uh, there are so many ways that particularly Black folks have had to figure out alternative economies because we have been pushed out of what it means to flourish in the United States. So I think I'm always thinking about how Black churches can be a good partner in that way. Because for me, I work with Black church folk. So I think there are ways and there's infrastructure that we have of taking care of each other and meeting each other's needs. Um, and I'm hoping that we can get closer to that iteration of Black church and a lot less of like,
say it how you feel it.
because you feel me catching myself, right? There's just a lot of sometimes I worry that Black churches become pyramid schemes, like ways of um, exploiting Black folk, not just materially, but like spiritually and emotionally and otherwise. Um, and it's so individualistic. So we go in, we hear our word, that word was for me, which yeah, sometimes that happens. But I think at its best, religious communities help us remember that other people exist in the world besides
Yeah,
us. And you need that memory, especially in the United States, when we are tempted to think that we're the only person that lives or suffers or exists as we do. So, yeah, we got to get away from this, just Christian capitalism. It's messy. It's goofy, and it's really not I think that's not the legacy of our most benevolent and radical ancestors.
yeah. I love that. In so many ways, and appreciate the care with which you have outlined um the legacy of our most benevolent and radical ancestors. There's of course uh complexity and contradictions within all of our family trees and lineage. And why not lean on the most benevolent branches and some of the most radical roots? Want to pause here and lift up a few things from previous conversations because they carry over. The tradition of mutual aid is something that we've seen in Philly with the Free African Society, and before we get the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Free African Society, figuring out how do we pool our resources to take care of our elders and bury folks with dignity. How do we have non-predatory ways of bringing our finances together? How do we coalesce not just as bodies in a room, but coalesce in purpose, coalesce in our aims to have a sense of solidarity? Also dropped in the chat Jessica Gore Nimhard's book, Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Activity. It's one of the best beginning resources that outlines the kind of genealogy or origin story of the kind of work that Minister Candace and I are talking about. And it's important to walk through this thing slowly and to parse through it, because you would think the way some folks enter into these conversations that you necessarily have to begin with Friedrich Engels or Karl Marx or somebody else, when the truth of the matter is there's a cross-hemispheric, diasporic, African continental tradition, as well as we can just start right here in the States and point to our long journey of doing this kind of work. Want to transition to the theme of popular education. We share a love of popular education as one key dimension of freedom work. I'm going to take a trip down memory lane. If you recall, almost a decade ago, bless the Lord, Stand with Black Women and Girls is something that you and I and Reverend Jennifer Bailey and Persina Doja and so many others did together, hopefully in the best of the popular education tradition. And particularly here want to center your research and work through Fish Sandwich Heaven. I think is an excellent example of popular education. Can you walk us through why you created Fish Sandwich Heaven and what it seeks to cultivate or accomplish?
Well, one of my, if not, well, it changes because as we grow in the faith, I think our we resonate with different parts of the story. But for a very long time, my favorite miracle was the feeding of 5,000 plus. Um, and I like the iteration where the beginning of the miracle starts with a child's lunch.
Yeah.
I love, part of me is like, dang, you mean the kid was the only one that had the sense to bring a little snacky snack? But there is another part of me that's like, wow, if we consider these things, like myths and folk tales, and not to to say that they are not meaningful, but to think about these stories as literature, how compelling is it that it is a child's thinking that is the beginning of the miracle for so many other people. So I imagine that there were fish sandwiches that were handed out. Um,
What kind of bread was on the fish sandwich?
you gotta have the white bread folded with, little dab of hot sauce. I where it sticks to the roof of your mouth a little bit.
Come
That's how
on, come on.
you know. But I so fish sandwich is the thing that's happening, but I am also very moved by Black people talking about heaven
Mm,
because especially in the spirituals, heaven is never this far off place. And, I think people who are critical of heaven language are right because part of the way that we have been bamboozled is to believe that heaven is some distant place. But as I'm combining fish sandwich heaven as one idea, I believe that the revolution is when our material needs are met now. And when
yeah.
our material needs are met now, that is heaven. I cannot think of any other thing that's closer to heaven than those things. So what I'm doing with Fish Sandwich Heaven is trying to provide particularly Christian resources to think through shared sacrifice and mental health and gender and sexuality, and to really be thinking about what are the spiritual technologies that we have to think about the world we live in today. And sometimes that means being critical of the tradition that we're part of. When I first started the podcast, um, I thought that my primary listeners would be Christians. I
Hmm.
thought that the people who'd be most interested in this would be, you know, Christians who are looking to deepen their faith and, how does this connect to the real world? But what I have found is that the most vocal and the most curious folks who listen and read are queer and trans atheists. And
Mm,
what I hear often in the feedback is, this helps me to understand my mother. This helps me to understand my childhood. This helps me to think through, for some people, it's like, my mom is a transphobe, and I want to know what it is about this faith, because it can't just be, hell and damnation. There got to be something else that is drawing my mother, my father, my workplace, my church to these ideas.
yeah,
Um, so part of it is also like being honest that uh, you have to be fluent in the language of your oppressor. And for many queer and trans folks, particularly Black queer and trans folks, our oppressor, sometimes they wear church hats, sometimes they wear preaching robes.
my mind.
If they're Mike Todd, they wear whatever they want to wear. Um, if they're Jackie Hill Perry, and it's so disappointing because Jackie Hill Perry is just a very swaggy individual. Um, and yet so much hatred falls from her mouth.
Mm,
And self-hatred. I have a lot of empathy in some ways for all the lies I have been told to her. Um, but so I'm hoping that people can become more fluent
yeah,
in this very, very opaque language. I mean, if even when you visit other people's churches, I've been in church since before I was born. When I visit other people's churches, I'm like, oh, y'all got a whole culture here. Like there's something very intimidating about the tradition. And I think we should honor that. And I have no interest in converting people. I'm never, look, I and maybe I won't, maybe I'm not a good pastor for that, but I don't care that you join. I don't care that you tithe. I am interested in walking with people as they're making sense of what Christian supremacy has done to our brains. And I think even if folks are not Christian, it is important to become fluent in the language, you know, some of the assumptions. It helps us to get a better contour on, the things that are before us. So,
that is rich on so many levels, and a part of what is coming up that I think is so powerful. You talked about how approaching the Bible as myths and folk tales and literature can open up some things for us. And I want us to walk slowly through this piece because there are some um, stakeholders, I'll say, within the Christian tradition that approach the Bible
Yes,
in
uh,
a
getting resources that
in
outlines.
a kind of unilateral sort of way that essentially suggest. I'm thinking of Brian Blunt here, who, and True to Our Native Land, talks about how there's a kind of fundamentalist way to approach the Bible as what he called the kind of dog and bone theory of exegesis, where there's only one thing that a text can mean. You pull up a bone, regardless of what age you're in, what your age is as a person, where you're reading scripture from. And so context doesn't really matter, history doesn't really matter, culture doesn't really matter, intentions doesn't really matter. There's just this kind of hermeneutical regime. And that has often been oppressive, deeply bland, and uncreative. And what you're calling us to realize is that there are in fact multiple things that text can mean, and that when we handle the Bible with perhaps a bit more care and creativity, it might be able to open up some more
mhm,
things for us. Want to just lift up a few places that folks that have come to the Bible from a variety of vantage points, folks that have come from anarchists and Anabaptist vantage points, and so often that's an interwoven tradition. Um, as well as the Quakers and the Mennonites and the Peace Church tradition that we don't put enough respect on, but they have much to tell us in an age where we refuse to have serious conversations about turning swords into plowshares and studying war no more. And come on, laying down our burdens down by the riverside. We talk about doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with God. But that study no war is in the same Micah book that we often turn to. Acts 2 and Acts 4 are often places where we see cooperative ways of envisioning what it means to kind of pool and bring our resources together. Mary's Magnificat and the first chapter of Luke. There are a number of other. Is that one of your blessed texts?
Oh my gosh. Let me tell you, Mary's Magnificat is so good to me because
It redefines how we think about praise in so many ways.
it's that's a socialist manifesto if I ever heard one. And you don't get a Jesus who says the first shall be last, the last shall be first, without a mother first who says he's going to send the rich away empty. He's going to scatter the proud,
You in the book. You in the book.
I'm telling you, that woman. And to be clear, I have a lot of questions about how Mary shows up in the story.
Sure.
I have a gender critique. I have a consent critique. There are some things I just don't like about what becomes, but the way that Mary makes sense of the task before her,
Yeah.
revolutionary, like actually revolutionary. Not, people are like, oh, this is revolutionary, and they're talking about like a new vacuum cleaner. No, no, no. I mean, like actually revolutionary.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Let's get the second question, third one on the table. But before we do, I can't leave that Magnificat alone since we ended up just kind of moseying down this pathway. A part of what I think is so powerful about hearing the hungry filled with good things, the rich sent away empty, the humble being exalted, and the mighty being pulled down from their thrones, is it helps us to de-romanticize and de-fetishize what we think political authority and the state can accomplish.
Mhm.
So often, even within socialist and communist sort of settings, the state is positioned as the deliverer, it's positioned as the savior, rather than at best an instrument that is Janus face that we have to fight against, even as sometimes there may be engagement with. And so Mary's pulling the mighty down from their thrones and the humble being exalted could be understood, particularly in light of the Luke Acts narrative brought together as authority and power and decision making capacity and genius resting within the demos, resting within the folk.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
I think Mary reorients our gaze in some rich ways.
Love.
Um,
I got my Bible out right now. We're trying to have we want to have Bible study.
and we trying to do it, and we trying to do it. So let's go here. And I know we got a couple minutes. Just first one want to check. Could we potentially do 5 minutes beyond 6:30? We can stop at 6:30 if we need to. Just
Sure.
want to inquire first.
Yes, we have time.
Okay, wonderful. Um, Coretta Scott King famously argues that America's economy is violent. I think her claim holds across all organizations of economy. The events of recent weeks confirms the pervasive violence of both not only our economy, but of our foreign policy, as well as policing strategies locally. So if we begin from the premise, um, and it's important that we begin from Coretta's premise, because Coretta arrives here first.
Hello.
I
Wake
don't
it up.
have no, I don't have no help in the sanctuary. Coretta
Wake it
arrives
up.
here first. And if we begin from that premise that our entire society is violent, what would it look like to build and redesign our society on the basis of peace and consent?
Mhm. Well, I think that's what these encampments are really helping to illuminate. And I part of me doesn't want to say that because I almost want to be like, how y'all don't see it? It's at least since 1492, we have seen violence visited upon this particular soil. But I also want to make room for people who, look, all of us are goofy and believe in a man once or twice in our lives. And that, I think that's what we're doing with democracy. Like, you know, it's goofy believing in a man, maybe a woman sometime in our lifetime, that person might be our savior, that they might have investment in life when it's been proven that they are incapable of that. And so, like, yeah, I want to make room for people who are just showing up to the party at this point. Um, for people who voted enthusiastically in 2020 because they thought they were voting fascism out, and then learned in the years after that that is not possible. You cannot vote fascism out. Um, I mean, even today, President Biden made a statement to the effect of, protest is protected, but violent protest is not. Which is a very telling statement. And what he's saying is that he has defined these student encampments, regardless of the shape and the scope. I don't care, like, if people are just sitting on a quad or if they're taking back, these halls and occupying.
Administrative buildings.
I actually don't care what happens, because all of it will be framed as violent. Because what the encampments are illuminating is that schools have an investment in a foreign country, and no one wants to sit with how absurd that is. That, like, this is a school in Harlem, in Chicago, in LA, in DC, and y'all have investment in a country, which then requires us to ask, well, what is the nature of this investment? What is the nature of this relationship?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to be paying attention to where the money is coming from and where it's going. You know, so much is going to have to, if we take seriously that we can design another world, and my heart wants to believe that, but my mind is like, okay, girl, impossible. Then it's we're going to have to take seriously that the US depends upon a war machine and manufactures consent for
Sure.
that war machine, and requires um, villains, requires bad guys, boogeymen, in order to carry out this violence, which is why, some of the responses to protest in Atlanta are so ugly to watch, because this
Okay.
is also this is also where Cop City is designed. And Cop City has a relationship, Cop City meaning this massive police training infrastructure that's gonna, level a forest in Atlanta, in Georgia.
Yep.
Um, they are getting their infrastructure and their blueprints from Israel. Like,
That's documented at
yeah,
Georgia State University. They're talking about them.
yes, NYPD trains with the IDF. And so we see those tactics happening alongside each other. Um, and so in order for us to build a new society, we actually do have to be ready for some things to go. And I don't know what the interim process is going to look like, but if people are saying to their school administrators and um, the world that we do not stand for this, and we want, at the very least, I mean, the floor is disclosing your investments, which some schools
Lord.
deciding not to do. If we we're saying that we want to know what's going on with the money.
Yeah. That's
I,
the best
I,
basic.
right. I remember coming home in the car with my mom, and my mom or my dad, as a kid, and we would pass the Golden Arches, And my brother and I, my sibling and I would whine and ask for French fries. And the response is, do y'all have McDonald's money? Well, the United States does have McDonald's money, and McDonald's and everybody, Walmart, Boeing, like all of these companies, Puma, although I think Puma has changed some relationship, Honey Pot, which is like a menstrual care line, factories in Israel. So we have to change everything, literally everything, our whole orientation to this world. And that means things are going to get uncomfortable. And that's the nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
So
No, that you have hit so many powerful things. And want to honor the gracious time extension which we have agreed to, and want to honor the saints' attention span. And so we're going to land the plane here. Want to say a few things about Plenty Good Room as we get ready to land the plane. Y'all know it takes preachers a long time to land planes, so I promise to do this as expeditiously as possible. One is, it's an attempt to try to create space for a capacious coalescing between those who envision autonomous politics and a mutual aid kind of space. So those for whom the Maroonage traditions of Jamaica and the Paris Commune and related attempts to create small is beautiful coalitions is a path forward to what Du Bois might call the cooperative commonwealth. To have space for those folks, as well as for folks who are where the Black Alliance for Peace and Sharice Burton Staley and others appear to be, in a kind of vanguardist sort of tradition that honors that many of our ancestors and many of our peers and siblings view a party uncaptured by capital, which is to say, not any of the parties that we have now, a party that's grounded in deep organization of labor, of community members, that too is a more centralized as opposed to the decentralized and autonomous tradition that I lifted up earlier. I think there's plenty good room politically, in terms of political ethics, in terms of political theology, for us to come together. Because the truth of the matter is, we can't just have the numbers of folk who be at our book clubs and get free that way. I can't hear nobody. We need everybody. And tactical points of coming together, where ideally folks are not compromising on principle, but are trying to envision something, struggle towards something. Lorraine Hansberry said, Negroes got to use every tactic we have before us to get free. Some of those tactics, I'm just telling you what Hansberry says, some of those tactics are nonviolent, but not all of them are so. This is what the author of Raisin in the Sun, one of our beloved playwrights, who herself was on a more contentious and I would argue a delightful end of the spectrum, had to offer to us. So this is hopefully a resource that is helpful for folks. We've also dropped some other resources in the chat. Please follow Fish Sandwich Heaven. You need the podcast in your life. Tell the saints about the curriculum that you wrote as well, which is also a beautiful resource that folks can tap into as well.
sure, I wrote actually, let me
Come on, take us to the text.
this is my first published work. This is Who Can We Be Together? Is a biblical exploration of Luke 13. And it is a playful but very, very serious approach to a series of like just confusing statements made by Jesus in Luke 13. He talks about, oh God, the guy is just like, sometimes I just want to hold Jesus' hand and say, honey, where is your mind right now? Like, how did you get to this image? But anyway, so it plays a lot with some of these parables that and these metaphors that Jesus is using to talk about community. So Thinking about when you leave a relationship alone. And I know we say relationship, we often think romantically, but sometimes you got to figure out when you are no longer part of a political home. And sometimes you got to figure out when you need to move your church home for whatever reason, even understanding yourself. So we play with a lot of different um, stories in that chapter. It's a very rich chapter, and that's with the United Methodist Women. I believe they're still, I don't know if they're still selling it, but you could just message me and I'll find a way to get you some stuff because I believe in liberating the curriculum. And so, um, you know,
There we have it. There we have it. Well, again, thank you so much. A joy to be in public dialogue with you, Candace. As always, y'all have a good evening and a wonderful rest of the day.
Awesome. Thanks.